Hey, David, we are in the thick of conference season here in the crisis field, and this coming week is the first time in 13 years the national network, in this case of 988 centers, was the Lifeline, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. All of them are coming together in one place for this conference next week in Chicago. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's always a busy season with NatCon and the American Association of Suicidology. But gosh, John, how long has it been since SAMHSA did one of these special crisis conferences?
Yeah, and again, to stay, it's so important we stay connected with callers, but it starts with us being connected with each other. And the last time we did that was in 2011 in Baltimore.
Yeah, I remember the one in New Orleans, John. I think it was 2007.
It was shortly after the hurricanes, and it was really important for us all to be together for that. That was really a momentous occasion.
Behavioral Health Link got an award that year, and we're going to come back to that Labor Day of 2005. Let's get the show started.
Welcome aboard Lifelines with David and John, your guide to charting the transformative course of crisis intervention and the game-changing 988 Lifeline.
Welcome back to episode 5 of Lifelines with David and John, the 988 podcast. We are every week from the heart of Atlanta in Georgia and stretching out across the nation. Last week we were around the world. But we're diving deep every week into the pulse of crisis, of 988, of mobile crisis, of crisis receiving and facility services, and the promising future of care that feels like care. We're your hosts. I'm David Covington, and I'm with my buddy Brooklyn, John Draper, Dr. John Draper.
How you doing?
We've been doing crisis, John, for a minute. We want you to watch us. Watch us on YouTube, like and subscribe, or wherever you listen to your podcast. But this is where you're going to get your daily dose of crisis. And our amazing guest today was one of the original crisis call center staff I met back in 2002 when Behavioral Health Link began operating. The original Fulton County, City of Atlanta crisis line started way back in 1966. Willie Whited, thanks so much for joining us. We're thrilled you're with us today.
Welcome, Willie.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Willie, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us something maybe that we wouldn't know. This is from your limited liability company, which is the name, Willie, is Planting Positive Seeds?
That is correct. That's my LLC, right? And from that, I still do what I love, helping others.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Willie, one of the things we do to get started every week is John and I have a blank piece of paper here and my black magic marker, and I'm going to write down what I think you're a super fan of. Now, I was a super fan of Lance Armstrong and the Tour de France for many years until I found out he was taking a shortcut. So, John, you're a super fan of Taylor Swift. You go to all her concerts.
Please, David. Yeah.
Something like that. It's a short answer. So,
yeah.
John, let's take it. You don't know Willie like I know Willie. So, and I took a sneak peek of his Facebook page. So maybe I have an inside shot. That worked well last week.
If you got the right Facebook page this time, David.
All right, so John, let's write something down. I'm just going to write down. I think Willie is a super fan of. Okay.
All right.
On the count of 3, John. 1, 2, 3. All right. Is that how you spell it? Is that an E? So,
Me?
Willie, I'm saying tennis. This is Willie with the cart of balls from playing tennis. And John says you're a super fan of the Atlanta Braves. Did either one of us get close?
Tennis would have to be my heart.
Tennis.
Yes, I started tennis at 12 years old. And I was one of the first to win in the state high school, and I got did various things, got awards.
Wow.
Met Arthur Ashe, and other people involved in tennis, and
What
so
was
yeah.
what was how did you meet Arthur Ashe, Willie?
Well, we had the American Tennis Association and the USLTA, and so we would the two groups would sometimes combine and get together and share talent, and different people would play there, within those tournaments. And so in Washington Park here was like the mecca for the tennis,
Yeah.
and that's where I started. And so Arthur Ashe would come down, other significant well, tennis players who were making a name. Um, the movie stars would come down. you know, uh, I remember Aunt Esther came down one year. So yeah.
So John, I knew it was either marching band or tennis. And John, since I did my homework, I'm now 2 for 2, John, by doing my homework beforehand.
Wait, whoa.
Yeah.
2 for 2? I'm sorry. Did you win last week? You did
John,
not.
tell us about the sponsor of this program, the Behavioral Health Link Crisis Software Platform.
Nice way to change the subject, David. It's such a treat to have Willie Whited with us today. He was among the first cohort of crisis hotline workers in America back in the 60s when hotlines were a new thing in this country. What was seemingly revolutionary at the time was the ability to speak on the phone with anybody at any time about your very private struggles, your feelings of shame or an overwhelming fear of sadness or your thoughts of suicide for free without having to give them your name. What was revolutionary has become evolutionary now, nearly 60 years later following the launch of 988. Thousands of hotline first responders across the country are not only expected to listen to a person and help them feel connected, but also to collect data, assess the nature and risk of their presenting problem, collaborate with them on a plan of care, counsel them to reduce their distress or risk, help them find appropriate community referrals, or seamlessly connect them to a mobile crisis team, empty hospital bed, or 911 services to keep them or others from being harmed now. All of this must be done efficiently because there are other callers waiting in the queue. So as the job of crisis counseling has evolved, the BHL's software platform has also evolved to provide counselors with a tool that makes their job easier. It supports them through the challenging workflow from the moment they say hello to the moment that the caller and counselor have found their next step on the road to recovery. If you want to learn more about this revolutionary and evolutionary tool for crisis counselors, check us out at behavioralhealthlink.com.
Thanks so much. Hey, John, thanks so much for all your work in advancing that platform, which is being used in a dozen states. And we're verging in on 10,000 users across multiple crisis centers. And today we're with a person who spent a lot of his career doing crisis work and overall work in the mental health and social work field. We're going to go to our trivia question, Willie. And to do that, we're first going to look at the past. So let's pull out, me, Willie, and John all remember the phone book that used to show up on the doorstep. Number of landfills that are full of these guys. But this is the phone book from 1966. If you look at the whole, we're looking at the top of the page, but you can see that whole thing. As we go into the inside of that phone book, you can see emergency numbers. And this is back when there wasn't 911, but the city of Atlanta was already launching a crisis line, and 911 would follow shortly after that. But let's look at the way that people also called back at that time. They did so not from a cell phone, but from either a landline, and that was either at your home or a business, or it was on the street. So we've got a picture of, and Willie, this picture is actually of someone calling. I took this picture back in 1990 from the intersection of Pryor and MLK. I didn't, Willie, but I could have. And the actual crisis center was near here. You guys were co-located with 911, if I remember. Well, you were on the same floor.
Oh, wow.
Willie, you were down the hall in the Fulton County crisis line from 911.
Yes. In the beginning, it was more like interdisciplinary. We had other people accessible there as far as professionals. And after a while, I wrote the program and developed the program on what used to be Bankhead, and that was the crisis center. But I can relate to that call because once when because I also did the crisis in DeKalb. Once when I was working in DeKalb, this guy called and threatened an official, top official, and I made the appropriate emergency calls, and before the person could leave the phone, he was getting hit. So that's what that reminds me of, because that's when we had those kinds of phones.
So those pay phones, John, and Willie's talking about someone calling from a payphone. We have a two-sided trivia question here. The first over-under is, what year did payphones reach their peak? And how many were there in the United States? So the way the over-under works, Willie, is John's going to give us an over-under, and you're going to tell us, now it's more than that or less than that.
Okay.
I'm not sure I have any way to do this logically, David. I mean, it's going to be mostly in, towns and metropolitan areas, but I really don't have a sense of how many there are in the United States. So this is going to be a wild guess.
So at the peak, John, what year was the peak, and how many were there at that time? There aren't that many anymore.
No, they're not. I would say the peak would have to be approximately 1990. Okay. And I would say that that the number of payphones would have to be, let's see, there's let's say back then about 200 million people in the United States. I'd say, how about 2 million?
Okay. So Willie, John says payphones reached their peak in 1990, and there were 2 million of them. So was that, is it more recent than that or earlier? And was it more or less?
I think it was a little earlier. Not by far, maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
But and more.
And more. So we got a split decision today. It was 1995, Willie, that it reached its peak. So you guys, John made that one really hard. And John, you cut it also really well on the number, but Willie's got you on that one. It was 2.5 million.
Oh, wow.
Back when people actually used payphones to get through to the crisis center.
That's interesting. Hey, David, I was going to say something about that phone book image that you had there. It reminded me, I mean, it really wasn't that long ago when we were using phone books. In fact, in 2005, when we hired the Social and Health Services for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline to promote the new 10-digit number, their first job was to make sure that number was in every phone book in the United States. That wasn't that long ago, 20 years ago.
Not that long ago. So, Willie, let's get into just discussing a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the Fulton County Crisis Line and what you remember about doing that work, which you and I first met. I think we met, Willie, around a phone call that you had received from the American Association of Suicidology and the Kristen Brooks Hope Center. John, this was back when you and I met and Richard McKeon was in the mix. Willie, do you remember that phone call when we first met back in 2002?
I call you so much about crisis, and, especially when we were having people admitted to Georgia Regional. But I think I recall.
Yeah. So at the time, you had received a call, and one of the things that you shared with me at that time is you had received certification through the American
Oh yeah.
Association of Suicidology to be a
Mhm.
crisis intervention specialist.
Oh yeah, of course. Yes, I did. Mhm.
Yeah. And Willie, tell us a little bit about your career and where you've worked and what some of the main challenges and opportunities you remember.
Okay. Let me just clear up something about tennis. Tennis was local. It made it sound like it was, all over the world. It was in where I grew up. But anyway, okay. Grady, eighth floor. From 80 until 12 years. Very interesting, very rugged, dangerous, because then you had COEs that would be dropped off on that unit, court ordered evaluation, and so that was pretty situation where they had to be. Back then, they were restrained. Beautiful
Yeah.
learning
So
experience.
Willie, just for John's benefit, Grady Hospital, one of the largest tertiary acute care hospitals in the United States, John, right in the heart of downtown Atlanta, where the interstates come together there. They call it the Grady Curve, where 75-85 meets 20. And it has a very significant set of behavioral health services that are for individuals both in Fulton and DeKalb County, which is where the city of Atlanta is. So the number of individuals, and you're saying, Willie, it was on the 8th floor at that time?
Exactly. Right.
Because when I was growing up in my career, we had moved to the 13th floor. But overcrowding challenges with people coming in. You used the COE, Willie, that they came in on court ordered evaluation. And my recollection is if a policeman brought in someone, they could be stuck there for quite some time as that was all working through. John, you aware of Grady, John, by chance?
I am, and what year was this you're referring to?
Yeah, so this is 1980 through 92 that Willie is talking about. He started out working in that Grady unit and
Yeah,
teeth on
yeah,
really into crisis services.
yeah. And hospitals were a different. I mean, they've evolved a little bit since then, but yeah. What? I was interested to hear what's the difference between your experience at the hospital as well as from the crisis line. Actually, one thing, if we could come back to that, because I'm really interested in those early years for you with the crisis line, because I'm fascinated by the history of crisis lines in this country, Willie, and here you were a part of it, and thinking about also what was going on in the 60s. There was this, when you were starting on that line, there were civil rights battles going on in the community. There was drafting of young people into a war that not a lot of people understood. There was an explosion of illegal drugs among young folks, and homosexuality was called a mental illness. Suicidality was against the law in a whole bunch of states, and it was sure to land you in a hospital if you mentioned it to a mental health worker. Can you just tell us to what degree did these cultural issues in any way translate to the work that you were doing on the phone back in 1966?
It really came. It's kind of difficult for me to separate it on a cultural basis. If you're speaking of experiences, of course,
Yeah,
it'd be different.
what did it feel like being on a hotline during this time? I mean, because there was so much going on in the community, and when you confronted people who were suicidal and people with various issues, what did it feel like for you to be on the phone at that time?
It it felt like an emergency. felt like a crisis because you were, I mean, at Grady, you saw someone, and there were some things you could do. On the crisis line, you had to develop a certain sensitivity and expertise to be able to, to make things happen for people with, safely and expediently.
Yeah.
Were most of your calls from people who were thinking about suicide, or was it just a wide range? What do you remember about the types of calls you were getting back then?
Wide range. Yeah. Well, and speaking of the phone, that was the way we would trace people. If people would call and it was pretty iffy and we needed to contact them, you used the white paper. Yeah.
So you'd have to get their name for sure.
Well, you could get that number. There were three different ways you could contact. So you use the white paper and the paper booklet, and in most cases, you were able to get help to contact.
So Willie, you're answering a phone.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the white pages there. You can't do a reverse lookup, John, like you can.
Yeah, right.
You didn't have any software. Did you have a pad of paper in front of you? Were you writing down notes? What did that look like? Did you have a folder that had resources in it? What do you remember what that was like?
Well, you had the ID that showed up. So before you get the phone, you'd have to, you want to make sure so you get that contact right away.
Right.
That a potential contact. Yeah. And so and then of course once you get some other demographic information, then it makes it easier to do. But suicide, I want to say it didn't happen that often, but it was awful. I mean, it happened. It not as much as other crises, but it was definitely a serious problem.
So people with mental health challenges, substance use, a host of other sorts of issues, all coming in at the same time. Let's do some good news, John.
Absolutely, I'm ready for it.
This past week, there was a event at the White House organized by SAMHSA and the CDC around the launch of the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention. And we've actually got a photo of that event, the Surgeon General leading a panel with Ashley Judd, Shelby Rowe, and Aloe Black. John, you've been tracking this national strategy launch for a few years. Your thoughts on the visibility and political will behind this today?
Yeah, it feels different this time around. I mean, the very first one was in 2001, and then the next 2011, 10 years later. Now we're jumping ahead about 13 years after the last one. A lot has happened since then. Certainly 988 being one of them. And some successes, in developing suicide prevention approaches. But the fact is, David, is we're not seeing us bending the curve in the rates of suicides. So, and with the Surgeon General talking about loneliness as an epidemic and making that a high priority, there's a real confluence of interest and engagement at the federal level in ways that we haven't seen, where there is discussion about suicide prevention, and enhancing it in the halls of Congress through 988, in the White House through 988, and also through the Surgeon General's office. And now we have this national strategy that can build on top of all that political will and resources. And I think it's different this time around because from what I've heard from Dr. McKeon, who we spoke to a couple of podcasts ago, he was reminding us that there's a federal group that's going to be engaged in implementing, not just writing and getting the strategy out there, but actually implementing its tenets. So there's so much that could happen with this that could really make a difference.
That first national strategy in 2001 didn't reference crisis care, John, even though Willie and I were both engaged in that work in Atlanta.
Not even hotlines. Didn't even mention hotlines.
Didn't even mention hotlines. And this time, this is the brief paper that was shared in the packet at 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline front and center. It was also great, John, to have lived experience highlighted. Aloe Black broke into song. Ashley Judd talked about her mother, and Shelby Rowe talked about her own suicide attempt and the challenges and opportunities as she has come out and shared her story going forward. So,
and David, that lived experience piece, it wasn't just huge at the event. It's I think that's another thing that makes the national strategy really different this year, or this time around, is that lived experience and the voice of people who've survived suicide attempts, who've been suicidal and lost someone to suicide, is present, and it was a part of the input of every single one of the strategies in the national strategy.
Yeah. Great stuff, John. So back to our guest here, Willie, who's worked in a variety of settings. He talked about Grady Hospital and their what at the time was the 8th floor psychiatric unit. Willie, you answered phones with the Fulton County Crisis Line. You worked in the services in DeKalb County with their crisis center. But there was one incident that you were commended for. And look, the work of supporting people in mental health crisis is challenging, rewarding, but sometimes there are big feelings can work themselves out in aggression or even violence at times. And you were commended for your engagement in something that happened at West Fulton Mental Health when a law enforcement officer was there. Tell us about that story.
We used to have the officers would come into the center with guns and things and their equipment and take the consumers to the mental health center. I mean, to the inpatient program. And this particular day, the person got a hold of the sheriff's gun and his stick and hit it. And then the sheriff was able to grab a part of it, and of course fight ensued. Everybody was scattered, and so we so I was there, and I wanted to make sure that no one was hurt, and I was thinking I could grab the gun, but the gun went off.
The gun went off.
Wow.
The gun went off. Guess where? In the back.
Oh my gosh.
Not at me. Right. And went into the other room. And I was so dramatic. I'm gonna tell you my pathology from that. but anyway, it was really a miracle. And then out of that 9mm, the bullets finally fell out.
And the clip fell out of the gun.
Fell out of the gun. And I hear it's not so sad because that struggle.
Yeah.
But it was very bad. He was seriously hurt. And
who was injured? The law enforcement officer was injured?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then what did you do then, Willie?
I attempted to, I stayed there with him and tried to contain the consumer, and I was there until the police came, and then we were able to apprehend him. When the gun was dysfunctional, then we were able to restrain him.
Yeah. So what the commendation, John, that I read online was about this interaction and how, Willie, you worked with supporting and restraining the individual who was agitated. and supporting the law enforcement officer until he got the care he needed. So, John, we talk about the heroic work that crisis staff do, and Willie was right at the heart of that.
Yeah, and you put yourself. I mean, obviously, you didn't arrange to be in such a dangerous situation, but there was a readiness, apparently, that you had for that. And I wonder, to what degree your training in the Air Force, as well as your training in crisis care, kind of came together to help you in this really dangerous situation to manage it so effectively.
In the Air Force, I really didn't see a lot of service. Grady was like that. You had to respond spontaneously, and then it could be violent. And in most cases, it was that way. I also worked for the CAB Crisis when they started at Georgia Mental Health Institute and branched off to, and I helped branched off with them with the CAB center. Telephone center. So I had those experiences, but I'd never been, having a gun.
Yeah.
So, Willie, you almost, I'm going to check to see if you have the bingo here, because you worked phones, you worked psychiatric inpatient in an ED. Well, let's call it emergency receiving in an emergency department or psych emergency room. You worked crisis stabilization. Did you work mobile crisis services ever? Because that would give you bingo if you did that.
With the CAB, of course I did.
Oh, my goodness. Willie, do you know?
You are the crisis care continuum, Willie.
So, Willie, I was when you and I first met, I was joining the work in the city of Atlanta, and we had a meeting every week of the FCCSS. Right. You remember FCCSS? Kyria Fayez was with the mobile crisis team. I almost had his name. He was from Grady psychiatric doctor. Was it Dr. Wood?
Yeah, Keith Woods.
Keith Wood, and then Ron Hogan from Georgia Regional Hospital, and then Lynn Copeland from Fulton County. That was I tell you, it was an amazing early on in that 1990 to 2010, this collaborative crisis. It's the kind of thing Richard McKeon's talked to us about for 20 years, John, this integrated sort of approach. But
it sounds very integrated, Willie. And I wonder, with you're having the entire scope of experience in crisis care, was there one of those experiences that you looked forward to the most when you got up in the morning and went to work?
Well, I also did a lot of work with co-occurring disorders when that came out in '89, called Do a Diagnosis. And I did training at Fulton, that, and also with suicide at Fulton. But I was able to experience a lot of positive things from consumers that I worked with. Specifically, one consumer came in, started with, do a diagnosis, very serious. But he could print, and we encouraged him to draw. And he just went, it was just beautiful. He ended up being recognized by the governor. And his picture is in the governor's. I think it's the DVD, but it's downtown. Sadly, he couldn't go because he died before.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, but I do have some, pictures and even the program from then, of that event, because it was so significant to me.
Wow!
So much of crisis work, Willie, is learning what people's strengths are and helping to really leverage that and build on that so they can get themselves out of crisis. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did there.
Yeah, so John, let's build on this. We've spent a lot of time talking about Atlanta.
Mhm.
Willie, what's your favorite shorthand for Atlanta? Is it ATL? Is it Hotlanta? Is it A
Yeah,
Town? What
I don't like hot Atlanta.
you
ATL.
don't like Atlanta? It is Hotlanta, John. I remember the year before I moved out here, it was 100 degrees 30 days straight in July, and 100. I'll take 110 in Arizona over 100 in Atlanta any day because it's hot.
Mm.
But hey, let's go to the either or. Willie, you got to make a choice
Mm.
here. Willie, the first one, obvious one for Atlanta: Braves or Falcons? Willie, Atlanta Braves or Atlanta Falcons?
Braves.
Oh, John, you
Braves.
called it. Yeah,
Yeah.
all right,
Mm.
all right.
I'm getting closer anyway.
What about this one, Willie? Fat Matt's Rib Shack or Fox Brothers Barbecue? Fat Matt's Rib Shack or Fox Brothers Barbecue?
I miss both of them.
Fat
He's a
Matt,
vegetarian, David.
are
Yeah, that
you into
works.
barbecue? Are you into barbecue, Willie, at all?
Not often.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's easy.
You got to go back to the Facebook page, David. Do your homework.
Willie, Fulton County Mental Health or Grady Psych?
I enjoyed. I mean, I've even worked up in Gainesville, but
Yeah.
I would Grady I thought was just
Yeah. Okay.
a
So
learning experience.
I didn't think I was going to get him to pick between his children, but he did, John. He picked. All right. Let's go to. Here's one for you, Willie. World of Coke or the Georgia Aquarium?
Georgia Aquarium.
Do they still have those giant whale sharks there?
Mm-hmm. I believe one passed, but
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So here's one for you, Willie. Professional counselor or social worker? Now, Willie, I want you to get this. I want you to get this one right.
I can't do that. You're getting me in trouble. I like being a social worker.
That's a very politically correct answer, John. I think
Yeah.
I think he hedged.
Yeah. I got one for you, Willie.
Mm-hmm.
Hotlanta or Brooklyn?
Hotlanta.
he hates Hotlanta.
Yeah.
Still
But it's better than Brooklyn. I get it. All right.
All right, here's one, Willie. The Varsity, Willie, the Varsity, or Mary Mac's Tea Room?
We some bad food sometimes, but tradition, the varsity.
You know, I have never been to Mary Mac's. Have you been there?
I believe so, but it's been a while.
I've been there twice, David. It's good.
Their
chicken is legendary.
A couple more, Willie. Here's one. Peaches or pimento cheese?
Peaches.
So, John, every street in Atlanta, sometimes you're at the intersection of Peachtree Street and Peachtree Road and around the corner at Peachtree Drive. So let's do one more. The Peachtree Road Race or the Dragon Con Parade in downtown Atlanta?
Peachtree Road Race.
John,
what is the Dragon Con, David?
So the Peachtree Road Race is the best 10K in the world, which I had to run with Michael Clays every year. The Dragon Con is it's a festival, and people are dressed up in superhero, and it's mostly science fiction, though, stuff.
Yeah, it sounds very Game of Thrones.
World of the Ring, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. That's right.
Cool.
Hey, so let's get back to our guest, Willie Whited, who's worked the full bingo of crisis services, John, from Fulton County to Gainesville. He's worked around the bend. Willie, you didn't tell us much about your Air Force experience, but you did work during the Vietnam era. What was that Air Force experience like for you, and what did you do there?
I actually was in a medic. That was and that entailed lots of things. You know, I would well back then you would get a cap with a red thing on it and a 45 to go out in the field. Now what can you do with a 45 in an ambulance?
So you had your medic hat or helmet, just
Yeah.
like John. We used that in the TED Talk that we did around crisis services of that medic in the field, and you had your 45. Did you have some bandages, Willie? What did you have? A little first aid kit?
Yeah. In other words, you were second in command when it came to. Now I didn't go there, but you know I went there as far as the training and what the expectation was. But the day before I was to go there, they pulled out. I just finished
the day before.
The day I finished tech school and was going to Vietnam, and they pulled out. Yeah.
You would have been a medic in Vietnam had it not been for timing.
Yeah.
And Willie, you know, just imagining you in Vietnam with the little red cross on there and you're carrying a 45, I could see how useful that would be, because you go to see somebody who'd just been shot and they would look up at you and say, and you'd say, how can I help? And they'd say, shoot that guy for me.
Yeah. Yeah, the worst thing I saw was little kids, 18-year-olds, and you know, coming back, you know, who were reconnaissance and all of that, and coming back on heroin and how they had adapted to so many things. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Willie, let's talk just a little bit more about the crisis work that you did at the heart of one of the largest cities in the United States. And John mentioned some of the context, but John, obviously, the substance use that was going on at the time, impact of poverty in a big city, and this. Willie talked about dual diagnosis, people who are struggling with mental health and substance use challenges. And also suicidality often in that mix. But Willie, the resources you had available were limited at the time. You talked about this work with law enforcement. My guess is you frequently were working with law enforcement because you didn't have a lot of capacity of mobile crisis teams that could get out there rapidly. Do you remember what some of those challenges were, Willie, trying to craft a solution when you had few resources at your disposal to help?
If you recall, when we had the crisis teams, it was broken down to management, and so I managed the whole thing. I did. I was it, you know. and I had one the person helping, secretary, you know, administrative person. But I saw everybody, and I would send, you know, and I would call you, you know, quite a bit, you know. So, but no resources, so we did what we best we could. It made sure.
You know, Willie, I was thinking about your incredibly long career and each stage of it. Again, you're across the entire crisis care continuum, and you started all the way back in 1966. First of all, how old were you in 1966, if you don't mind me asking?
So John, the Atlanta line started in 66. John, Willie's talking about his career really starting in 1980.
Oh, 1980. Okay, so I thought that was I got it.
Yeah, so, Willie would be 120 years old if he worked on that. But he worked in Grady Psych, and eventually he worked in all these other services. I met him in 2002 when we were first interfacing with that Fulton County crisis line.
So I'm wondering, at what point in your life, Willie, did you say, what I want to do is help people with psychological problems, and what led to that?
I was playing tennis and went over to someone's house and they had a book on the floor and it was about psychology and Sigmund Freud. I read the whole book and I
Wow.
really, yeah, that's why I enjoy Grady so much. Psychodynamic theories.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
So you started off dealing with the id, the ego, and the superego. Next thing you know, you're working with co-occurring disorders in a crisis care setting.
no, it was everything. Psychosis, basically.
Yeah.
At Grady, it was Grady was whatever was going on in the city had to be fixed at Grady. Had to be, you had to get help.
Yeah, John, I think when I first started working with Willie back in 2002, one of the things that we looked at was the difference in the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and that local crisis line. And you had individuals calling the national line with issues of substance use, with issues of serious mental illness, but at a much lower percentage than happened on that. And I think as 988 forces those together, it's changing that whole dynamic. And a lot of the challenges that Willie faced on the front lines is that as that medic in Vietnam almost, we're starting to interface that because a lot of that traffic historically has been sort of pushed to 911 and all that's. So it's really, really great, Willie, having you on. Willie, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned Arthur Ashe. Let's talk about some other famous people from Atlanta or thereabouts. And let's just get a quick, if you have any reflections on that individual, or if you met them. Jimmy Carter, our 39th president, not from Atlanta, born in Plains, but of course the Jimmy Carter Library.
Georgia.
Still Georgia. Did you ever meet the Carters, Willie?
No, I sure didn't. I was in California. Yeah.
Any reflections on the president from the Peanut Center of the Universe?
It's a great human being.
What about Martin Luther King Jr., born in Atlanta, the Reverend Martin Luther King?
Well, I went to Washington High, and he often was at Pasco's, and he was a person. So I've seen, and actually, I grew up maybe a quarter of a mile from his house.
I have never visited his birthplace, John. That's something we need to do.
Absolutely. Next time I'm in town, let's do it.
Willie, Tyler Perry, filmmaker, actor, and producer, famous for his Medea character, but he founded one of the largest film studios in the United States, and it's in Atlanta.
I have heard a lot of the great things, humanitarian things, and he's a genius for making that happen. But I've never met him.
Julia Roberts, she was born in Smyrna. Of course, famous movies, Pretty Woman, Aaron Brockovich. I lived in Smyrna for a time, John. I actually was living under a rock. I remember I was having dinner with someone back 30 years ago, and they said something about Julia Roberts, and I said, "Who's Julia Roberts?" But
how close is Smyrna to Atlanta?
It took me 20 minutes to drive into the office from Smyrna. John, we have Willie. Tell John what ITP and OTP means. I bet, John, do you know what ITP and OTP means?
Inpatient and outpatient?
Nope. Willie, do you? Willie, you know?
ITP.
So
intensive
treatment program and an outpatient treatment program?
No, ITP is inside the perimeter, and there are people who live their lives inside the perimeter.
I see.
You tricked us.
The perimeter is 285. It's a 50-mile interstate around the city of Atlanta. Yeah. And Grady is at the bullseye of the inside the perimeter. I lived 1 mile outside the perimeter, John. What about Hank Aaron, Willie?
Well, I've known Hank for a long time. As a matter of fact, I lived on the same street.
Really?
that he lived on.
What so many things that Hank Aaron accomplished, John Draper, but what was one of his most significant accomplishments?
What was it, 765 home runs or
Oh,
something?
okay. No, that's way better than John, you get an A+ on that one. I was just going to say he broke Babe Ruth's home run record, but you know how many it was.
Yeah,
Terrific.
yeah.
Terrific.
He was the greatest.
Well, Willie, what about Jeff Foxworthy? He's the one who had the "you might be a redneck"
Right.
one-liners.
I thought he was funny, but I didn't have.
He thought he was funny. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do a couple more. Of course, we got John Lewis, also another iconic civil rights leader and U.S. Congressman from Atlanta. So were you also around the corner from John Lewis as well, Willie?
I know. Again, back to tennis. A lot of people who play in tennis because of the socioeconomic, levels.
Yeah.
Yeah. People would show up. I mean, in other words, you would see a lot of people that had accomplished within the community. Mm-hmm.
It's like tennis was to back then that golf is now. I mean, everybody convenes on the golf course now. Back then, it was the tennis courts.
And Bobby Jones was from Atlanta, of course, before Nicklaus, before Tiger. John, as you use that analogy. Yeah. All right, so Willie, terrific, so great, going back to the 90s and early 2000s. But John, it's time for some absolutely true tales of behavioral health link.
All right, I'm ready for it, David, because I know you're going to tell the truth.
Yeah, and I have an actual photograph to prove that this is true. But it was Labor Day of 2005, and you'll see me on a bicycle. It was a bike race that I was on in Atlanta. But John, this weekend was when we were starting to see the influx of individuals who were evacuating Louisiana and Mississippi from Hurricane Katrina. We had about 120,000 people, including plane loads land in Marietta with individuals that were medically compromised. And the Commissioner of Mental Health, Gwen Skinner, and the leader for the city of Atlanta, Willie Ernestine Pittman, the three of us were coordinating on the phone to try to pull together the largest community mental health, the 10 agencies around the area, to pull them together. And we didn't have their phone numbers. So we divided them up. And John, I was calling, they were calling. We picked a few each. And we were calling through the crisis lines for those as I was on the bicycle, John.
David, you know what? That didn't happen.
It absolutely did happen, John. In fact, you were there. This picture, I edited it out, but it was actually a tandem bike, John, and you were behind me. Now, you weren't on the bike, John, but we actually did talk quite a bit as we began working with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and a FEMA grant to bring crisis counselors.
Now that sounds familiar. Okay, now it's all coming back to me except for the bicycle part.
John, it's time for some good news. And also, it's time for the plain truth section. Let's do some plain truth, John.
Yeah, because we didn't have any just a minute ago.
The plain truth, we're going to go all the way back to another photograph from an experience from years earlier, actually. I'm going to teach her a lesson about wasting our time in the hospital emergency department. That was the line I heard as I walked into a conversation between the doctor and the charge nurse in an emergency department in Rome, Georgia, back in the late 90s. Now, I was the licensed professional counselor who had been dispatched to go out and sit down and do an interview with this young woman who had made an overdose attempt. And it had taken me 45 minutes to make that drive in the middle of the night. And as I walked in, I hear the doctor explaining that he had ordered a charcoal lavage. It wasn't required. She didn't need that. She had taken a few pills and wasn't medically in the danger to have that charcoal lavage, but he ordered it anyways. And what we've since learned is such a procedure is dangerous. It can perforate the insides and is a challenging thing. But it does reflect this challenge that we have put on the hospital emergency department staff in particular, and the way they've sometimes responded negatively to that challenge, John. We talk a lot in the Crisis Jam and in the work that, John, you and I do together about inappropriately forcing police into these equations.
Yeah.
But we don't talk enough about the demand we forced on hospitals. As so many individuals every day, 20, 25,000 times a day, people are going through emergency departments for medical clearance before they can even be evaluated for any kind of referral to a detox program, an inpatient program, or some kind of crisis receiving or crisis stabilization. John, you and I met Cherie Lowe. She was Cherie Kruckenberg back in 2015 when she was the vice president of behavioral health for the California Hospital Association, representing 400 hospitals and health systems across that large state. And she wrote an open letter that year, the increasing dependence on hospital EDs to provide behavioral evaluation and treatment. It's not appropriate. It's not safe. It's not an efficient use of dwindling community emergency resources. More importantly, it impacts the patient's family, other patients and their families, and of course, the hospital staff. Now, in 2013, a group of individuals sued the state of Washington, saying that they were being held long periods of time just to try to receive care. Mental health leadership at the time said those claims were inappropriate because they didn't represent the average experience of individuals needing care. The Seattle Times said, let's see if that's true. They did a year-long investigation, and they found people were waiting 3 or 4 days on average just to try to get into substance use or mental health emergency care. John, it's time for us to move forward the kind of mobile crisis capacity that can be readily accessible for all of those individuals where there isn't an explicit medical emergency, just like we need those resources so we don't need to use police unless there's overt criminal activity or an explicit threat to public safety. And John, that's some plain truth.
Amen to that, David. Thank you for that. And that's it for us today. Stay cool, stay anchored, and look out for the lifelines that we toss your way next week. Willie, thank you for being with us today.
I'm good.